Today I'm going to be exploring the psychology and beliefs behind patriarchy, toxic masculinity, and misogyny. Patriarchy is a rigid set of beliefs that most people in our culture have unconsciously absorbed, and they influence the way that we feel, the things we say and do, the kinds of relationships and friendships we have, and the possibilities that seem open to us in life. Even if you're a man who has benefited from some kind of privilege, you have also been harmed by this ideology, because of the harm that it does to those you love, and because it leaves men intensely vulnerable to manipulation and fragile self-esteem. This is an enormous topic, but today I'll just begin to unpack the belief structure and psychology of patriarchy. As ever, if you find this video helpful, please give it a like and make sure you're subscribed to my channel. So I've come here to this beautiful spot in the woods to talk about quite an ugly topic, which is patriarchy and toxic masculinity. This is going to be part of a two-part sort of little mini-series, and I'm sure I will come back to it again in the future. Today I'm just going to talk about some of the theory around patriarchy, the psychology of patriarchy, what is it, how does it get implanted in our brains, what are the specific belief structures that it leads to, and how does it lead us to thinking and feeling in certain ways. And I'll be broadly talking about its effects on men and on women and on homosexual people and on trans people, and just trying to explore this whole topic. And then next week I'll be releasing a video which is all about how does patriarchy and toxic masculinity show up in men to varying degrees. I'll be doing a bit of a spectrum from people who are outright hostile and they engage in domestic violence or organised violence towards those who don't conform with the patriarchal model, right through to men who have done a lot of work on themselves, and yet, quite unexpectedly, it can pop up at the most unlikely of times. So that will be next week's video. How does patriarchy and toxic masculinity show up in men? So the first thing to say is that whoever you are watching this video, you have been personally harmed by patriarchy. It affects everybody negatively. Even if you have personally benefited from it in some way, the bad massively outweighs the good. So what I'll be doing is exploring how do we continue to hold on to something that does us so much harm, and how do so many people continue to believe that it's a good thing. Today is very much a theory video. This isn't going to be a here's the problem and here's the solution video that I do so often. As I often say, the most powerful thing that we can do in order to grow as people, to evolve, to have more opportunities open up to us, to have better relationships, to have more prospects in our lives, is to bring the right attention to the right places at the right time. And so understanding something to a greater degree, or having a really strong framework to explore something, is just really helpful in being able to do that effectively. So today I'm just going to be talking at length about what is patriarchy, what is toxic masculinity, where do they come from, why do we do this to ourselves? So the first thing to kind of explore is we have this kind of human tendency towards, I mean, you could call it tribalism, but more particularly towards ranking people. And this is preyed on constantly to try and sell you things, whether it's trying to get you to vote for something or trying to get you to buy a product. And it's been used for a very long time throughout history to try to manipulate people. We just have this kind of tendency, whether it's a human thing or whether it's a sort of cultural thing that we've been taught, we have this tendency to think that these groups of people are better and more human and more worthwhile, more worthy, more trustworthy. They should receive more rewards from society than these people. A famous example of this would be the Nazi Party in Germany. They came to power because they cynically manipulated a whole series of different pre-existing beliefs, but they, at the core of Nazi ideology was this idea of a ranking system of races, that some people are genetically superior and should be allowed to reproduce and should be promoted and should be given the best jobs and should be rewarded more than these people. They used a bit of Nietzsche's philosophy of the Übermensch, the better men, the greater men, and they said that these Aryan people, they chose Aryans, because it fit in with various other bits of the ideology. These people are better than the Untermensch, the lower people, these different races that live they happen to live far away, or they happen to be the people who were already hated by some very desperate German people. So very cynically, the Nazis were able to create this ranking system, a very rigid one, that said that these people are better than these people. And patriarchy is another example of one of these ranking systems. I'm going to be talking about the psychology of patriarchy today. If you Google it, you'll find that most of the time people are talking about inheritance, like patriarchy is the system where only men can inherit property or only men have power, things like that. I'm going a bit deeper than that, and I'm talking specifically about the psychology. Now, there are as many definitions of patriarchy out there as there are people writing about it. So I'll just tell you mine. My definition of patriarchy is violence, threats, and coercion that are used to enforce the dominance of a very narrow definition of maleness, of masculinity. Okay? So it is the use of whatever power mechanism is necessary to enforce this ideology. And this can manifest at all sorts of different levels. It can manifest at outright violence, individual violence, domestic violence, hostility out on the street, certain religious groups who are allowed to do atrocious things to women or to children because it fits in with the patriarchal model. So it can manifest as outright hostility and violence. It can manifest as social structures and power structures where men are paid more than women, or men are more likely to be promoted, or if you're having a meeting, a man is more likely to speak up, he'll speak louder, he's more likely to voice his opinion even if he isn't sure about something, and he's certainly more likely to get attention and be listened to than women in the meeting. These are all very proven things. There's an awful lot of data to suggest that those are things that happen. So a man feels safer to voice his opinion more loudly, and a woman tends to feel that they need more evidence and they need more proof, and that they need to use some other mechanism, some kind of other route to be heard and to have an effect. So those are examples of how patriarchy starts having an effect. It's also an internalized thing, and that's mostly what I'll be talking about today. So it becomes something we take on and we just have at the back of our heads whispering to us to manipulate our thoughts and our feelings and our choices and our expectations and our outlook on the world. And it's generally my belief that almost everybody in our society has this internalized voice. What it is a wider ideology which has been shared and reshared for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it seeps in through little things that our parents say when we're growing up, or things that our friends at school say, or things that our teachers say to us when we're young, and certainly through popular fiction, through movies and TV and books. It seeps in through all sorts of different ways. It promotes one group of people being better than others. And in patriarchy, the group that is better than others is a very narrow idea of what men are, or what maleness is. Okay, so what is the narrow definition of maleness that is promoted and enforced within a patriarchal model and by the patriarchal ideology? Well, successful. Men of this particular narrow definition are successful in some way, in whatever the way they have chosen to be. Perhaps they're fantastic fathers, perhaps they are amazingly good in their career, perhaps they have a lot of money, but they can laud the idea of success and they can promote it, and they draw huge self-esteem from their apparent success in the world. They are emotionless, broadly. They may be allowed some masculine emotions like anger or ambition, but broadly, a man who fits this narrow definition is emotionless. He's also inexpressive. He doesn't show emotion, he doesn't show weakness, and he doesn't really show anything else. He doesn't show joy. He is a sort of a Luddite. He just sort of stomps through the world and doesn't show any external sign of how he feels. He's probably sexually promiscuous and certainly domineering in a sexual way and aggressive with it. He should use violence or humiliation. He should mock and attack women or other groups, weaker men, men or trans people who don't fit the definition of maleness that we're talking about. He will use violence and humiliation to attack them and try and keep them in their place. He has untethered aggression. It's fine for this particular type of man to be aggressive towards the rest of the world. That's fine. He will also use morality and ethics simply as a mechanism to get what he wants. This particular type of man is not bound by anyone else's idea of right or wrong. He just cynically uses words like that and ideas like that in order to get what he wants out of life. He should personally be insensitive. He shouldn't feel things, he shouldn't notice things, he shouldn't acknowledge any emotions that he has or any physical feedback that he gets from the world. And finally, he should be highly tribalistic. Perhaps that's being patriotic, so the tribe is the country, or perhaps it's my buddies, my little group, my social grouping, my job type, whatever it is. He should be very tribalistic and stick within his narrow idea of these are my people. So those are some things that this very narrow idea of maleness should absolutely embody. And everybody who doesn't embody those things is failing, should be judged, should be attacked, and should be pushed down. So the belief structure actually works like this. There are 4 stages. The first is a belief that a certain type of maleness, a certain type of man, is better than everyone else. And that's all those things that I just kind of listed there. If you embody all of those things, you are better than everybody else in society. So that's the first stage in the belief. The second part is if you are capable of embodying that, so if you have a male body, then you are obliged to become it. If you are not embodying those things about maleness, then you are failing. And you should be constantly working to be more and more like that. So every man, to some greater or lesser degree, is carrying this idea that they should be those things. And if they aren't those things, they are failing, they are weak, they are not real man. So you must try to conform to that. That is your job as a man. The third part of the belief structure is if you are not physically capable of being that man, you don't have a penis, then you have already failed. You are a lower class of person. Also, if you are not capable of becoming that because of something tragically wrong with you, like you're gay or you are trans, then you can never become that ideal of what it is to be a man, and therefore you can never succeed. You can never be the best that you can be as a human. So your job then becomes to be as pleasing and supportive and obliging as you can to real men. If you can be sexually available to them and look nice and make them feel good about themselves, and if you can provide for them, and if you can make their home nice, then you have some value. But you'll never have all the value. You'll never be a real person. You'll never be the best that you can be in society, and just as a side effect of what's wrong with you. You're not a man, or you're not capable of becoming this kind of man. So that's the third stage. So we have some men are better than others. Men are obliged to become that thing. If you can't become that thing, then you've already failed, and the best you can do in society is to provide for those men. And then the fourth one is that everything in society should be ordered to support this structure. So jobs should be more available to real men, this narrow idea of maleness. Self-esteem should be constantly available to them because it should be reinforced by women and by their children. You're a great husband, you're a great dad, whatever. It should be constantly fed back to them that they have high self-esteem. Entertainment and social sports and things like that will all be structured around these kind of very narrow idea of what maleness is. Society should be ordered to keep this in place. So those are the 4 stages of the belief structure that we've all internalized around patriarchy. Now, I'm saying all of us, it's at greater or lesser extent. A lot of men who grow up, certainly when I was growing up, TV was dominated by all of this. It was action movies and it was, Disney movies, and the men were always this. They were always emotionless, they were always successful, they were always inexpressive, they didn't ever seem to feel anything really, and they always won. They were always the hero. And women and children and anyone else who didn't fit that narrow definition was just there to kind of support them, make them look good, make them feel good. So certainly my generation really grew up with that. There is a shift, and I'll be talking about that in a minute, but to some greater or lesser degree, we all have this 4-part belief structure inside of us. And then all of the other effects that we see of patriarchy and toxic masculinity within society are just a kind of a result of those 4 stages of belief. Men have this constant pressure to try to conform to a narrow idea of what it is to be a successful, healthy man. Women feel on some level a pressure to be obliging, to be pretty, to be available, and to make a man feel good about themselves, to make sure that they're supporting his self-esteem. And then, of course, there's just the way that men can make use of this. Even if you are, a pretty evolved man and you spend a lot of your life working on yourself and you want to be an ally to women or to gay people or to trans people, when a job opportunity comes up and you can behave, you walk in and you see the interview panel is all men, you might find yourself acting a little bit differently. You might want to seem more manly. You might want to joke about how, I don't know, you might even make an inference that a woman couldn't really do this job. Men will just occasionally make use of this, no matter how evolved they appear to be. So those are just examples of how it kind of filters through, and I think in the future I will just return to this topic and talk about how patriarchy and toxic masculinity actually show up, how much harm it does us, and all those sorts of things. When you have a form of prejudice within a society, it is those who are excluded or denigrated or attacked who notice it first. And they're the people who will tend to protest against it, and they're the people who will tend to work against it. So part of the level of understanding of this depends where on the sort of social spectrum you appear, in terms of this end are the people who are in patriarchy better, this particular idea of men. Some men just fit better into the patriarchal model than others. So if you're on this end, you're less likely to notice that this is a thing that's happening around you because it's all working for you. You'll only start to notice it when stage 4 of the belief, the idea that society should be arranged around you, begins to kind of fall apart, and you're no longer the top of the pecking order. You're no longer being supported, and your self-esteem isn't being reinforced by those around you. You'll start feeling like something's gone wrong. Right through to the other end, if you're trans, if you're gay, if you're a very self-aware woman, then you've spent your entire life fighting against this model. In the same way that racism is far more apparent if you are the victim of racism, patriarchy is far more obvious to people who are the victim of it. So that's a thing to bear in mind. If you're watching this video and you are more or less aware of this whole system and how these beliefs are implanted in your brain and they whisper to you and they manipulate the way that you behave, it may have something to do with your place in this social hierarchy that patriarchy creates. And then finally, I just want to talk a little bit about social evolution and how we're kind of getting out of this and it's causing a backlash. So what I've loved seeing in the last 10, 20 years is the way that movies have changed. There are more and more movies with women as main characters, with a series of women who talk to each other and they don't make reference to men. All sorts of different things within popular culture which are just more and more promoting women's autonomy, the idea that humanity is not ordered in this weird artificial way, that this narrow idea of maleness is the best. So that's been great, and other things are shifting as well. More and more jobs are becoming sort of gender neutral. Women are becoming much more present in some of the higher paying jobs, a lot more female CEOs, highly skilled technical experts, all these kinds of things. You're finding more and more women in those roles. You're also finding gay men, you're also finding trans people creeping into those kind of roles, and society is becoming more balanced. The problem that this then causes is that stage 4 in the belief structure is that society should be ordered to promote these types of men. Society should be structured around us to make sure that this narrow idea of maleness is promoted, that these men have their self-esteem reinforced, that they are provided with the best jobs, and that they are protected from any true emotional or personal challenge. As that goes away, you then have a backlash from men, and a backlash from some women who have really internalized the ideology. And that backlash is to attack social progress. It is what's usually called conservative belief. That's more true in the American definition of conservatism than it is in the British one, but still this idea that we need to go back, that we've gone too far. And it is the backlash of generally men who are no longer finding that everything has been made easy for them. They're no longer having a clear pathway to success as a human being. There's no longer a really easy answer to, am I doing well? Should I have high self-esteem? So these men then become, if they're not self-aware, if they haven't investigated this, if they don't know that this belief structure exists within them, they just begin attacking. They say we should enforce policies which will take things back. The extreme examples would be things like the incel movement of men who they're no longer receiving things from society that they believe on some level they should have, and so they attack women and others who don't fit the model. And that is toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is where men who are not aware that this artificial belief structure has been implanted in them, they're not aware where their sense of privilege and their belief that they should be the top of the pecking order, they don't know where all that comes from, and so they naturally attack. And they feel like they're defending themselves. They feel like there's a natural order to the universe. They can find it in the Bible, you can find it in the Quran. Men should be at the top and women should serve us. So I'm pushing back. And that nasty behavior, that really unwholesome behavior, is toxic masculinity. And you will find it within all sorts of men when you didn't expect it. If every man and every woman, every person in our society has internalized this 4-stage belief structure, then we all carry the idea that we should all be working to reinforce it and keep the social order in that way. Even if you're very self-aware, even if you have been the victim of it, even if you have worked for years to root it out within you, at the most surprising times you can find that you're making reference to patriarchal belief. One of my clients, lovely guy, he would really fall into the category of sort of an ally of feminism, just very psychologically evolved. And he's just had a son, and he found himself thinking at one point, I don't want my son acting like that because I don't want him to be excluded at school. He seems a bit sensitive. He seems a bit too emotional. And he immediately thought, what the hell? Where did that come from? Why am I worried about my son having a healthy emotional experience and expressing himself? That's brilliant. But I'm worried about it because I was bullied at school and I don't want my son to go through that as well. So we all carry this to some degree. Next week, I will be coming back to this topic and I'll be talking about how this shows up in men. So I will be laying out the spectrum of patriarchy and toxic masculinity within men. And I will be saying that there are men who just have, it is their bread and butter. It is what they live, and they are constantly trying to reinforce it and enshrine it. Right through to men who have done all this work. They're as self-evolved as they can be, and yet it still pops up when they least expect it. So that's what I'll be talking about next time. I hope some of that has been useful or interesting. As I say, this wasn't one of those, here's a problem and here's a solution type videos. This is a very different type of video. And yeah, I hope just some of that has been either new information or just structured in a way that's going to make it more useful for you. I talk a lot to my clients about generational trauma, about how certain things are handed to us by our parents because it was a trauma that they carried. They don't know that they carry it, and so they pass it on to us. And each generation has the possibility of healing a bit of it and trying to protect their children and other children from carrying this trauma forward. And we can only do so much. We are not going to eliminate patriarchy in this generation, or probably for a couple more generations to go. It is just too ingrained. It pops up at the most unexpected times, and because of the backlash, it is sort of being reinforced in certain parts of our society. So it's a duty upon all of us to become as aware as we can of patriarchy, of toxic masculinity, how it operates within us, how it whispers to us, and to try to root it out, try to evolve our belief structure so that we don't have it anymore, and not to pass it on, to let it die with us. So that's a really important part, I think, of personal growth and development. I hope this has been interesting to you. As ever, please give it a like, make sure you're subscribed to my channel, and I'll see you next time for an exploration of the spectrum of toxic masculinity. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.